I'm in the process of making 3 videos based on the 3 movies contained in the M. Night Shyamalan Collection DVD box set, which I also made an overall video on: The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Signs. This is the second video in that trilogy. Enjoy! In that original Shyamalan Collection video, I compared my experience of watching Unbreakable to the general reception to it at the time of its release. When I saw it, I wasn't instantly blown away, like I was with Signs, which I saw before Unbreakable. This is a gross simplification, but a similar thing seemed to happen with the release of Unbreakable compared to that of The Sixth Sense. When The Sixth Sense premiered in 1999, it was instantly a massive success. While before that, M. Night Shyamalan was a relative unknown, now all eyes were on him and what he was going to do next. Unbreakable released a little over a year after, in November of 2000, and over its theatrical run made about a third of what The Sixth Sense did, monetarily. A modest success, but people were expecting more, which is to say, people were expecting different. I think a lot of this is due to marketing and audience expectations. Like The Village after it, Unbreakable was marketed as another supernatural thriller, more similar to The Sixth Sense. Seeing these trailers is super weird, knowing what the movie is really like.
Where were you sitting on the train?
Against the window.
In the passenger car?
Yes.
What we actually got was a somber drama about Superman? Yeah, a somber drama about Superman. When Tarantino named Unbreakable as one of his favorite movies made since 1992, he actually pretty much nailed it describing the marketing.
Because you can actually break down what the film was about by basically one sentence that I think would have proved far more intriguing than their ad campaign, which is basically, what if Superman was here on Earth and didn't know he was Superman? Which is what the film is about.
And I agree. I think this Tarantino fella might know a thing or two about film. I hope he makes a career out of it someday.
Amazing stranger from the planet Krypton, the Man of Steel, Superman!
Unbreakable is the origin story for David Dunn, as played by Bruce Willis. As Shyamalan described it, it's basically a long first act, and it's very comic booky. David is the lone survivor of a horrible train crash. He finds out something is different about him, and he finds out he has powers normal people don't. With the help of a mentor, he experiments with his powers and finds a sense of purpose. He uses these powers to take down a bad guy and accepts his place as a protector of his city. So, straight out of a comic book, down to the alliterative name, David Dunn. He, as Tarantino accurately described it, is our Superman, our Clark Kent. The film even openly references comic books and how things that happen fit within a story of the structure of a comic book.
Characters in comics are often attributed special powers, invisibility, X-ray vision, things of that sort.
Okay. I don't want to play this game anymore.
It's an exaggeration of the truth. Maybe it's based on something as simple as instinct.
What I feel makes Unbreakable special is its fine touch with material like this. It's very realistic, for sure, but not in the grimdark, gritty TM way that seems to be cool with comic book movies. It gives off that feeling that this could be happening right down the street. This could be that random security guard, or whoever really, that you pass by sometimes. There is a sense of these people going through their everyday lives, having their mundane marital problems, but this incredible thing just happens in the middle of it. But more so than realistic, the keywords I would use are subtle and subdued. David is Superman, but he doesn't fly or shoot lasers out of his eyes. He's strong, but he can be caught off guard, and he has to struggle to fight a man bigger than him. Even the scale of the movie itself. The big superhero moments are David Dunn in a flashback forcefully ripping open a car door in a burning car, struggling to do so, and later on in the movie, after a lot of build-up, wrestling a man in a bedroom. Now this may sound like I'm being negative, but I'm saying this in the most positive way I possibly can. I love how this incredible story is told in such a small and subtle way, and a lot of the story works like a mystery, so the subtlety works very much for the movie's advantage. Is there something special about David, or is he a man that was incredibly lucky? What is also very subdued, but very effective, is the comic book style of the movie. The movie not only looks beautiful, but also uses many techniques to achieve a comic book panel feeling. One common technique is using a lot of frame within a frame, framing the characters as if they were in these panels. The film uses very deliberate framing and long shots. Often these camera moves feel like moving your eyes from one panel to another on the page of a comic book. Cinematographer Eduardo Serra did an absolutely beautiful job on this film. This style of presentation also contributes to another strength of Shyamalan's that I mentioned in The Sixth Sense. how tight his movies are. Unbreakable is obviously as tight a script as The Sixth Sense, if not more so, but as a film feels even tighter. While I was talking about you not being able to lift a single element from The Sixth Sense as superfluous, here I feel the same is true on the level of images. Every shot in this movie needs to be here, not one less, not one more. Of course, film really isn't that exact of a science, and if there was one more shot, I would still probably be saying the same, but my point still stands. It feels like it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. Every shot is just right to serve this story.
From this day forward, I shall call myself Radioactive Man.
So that's how it happened.
As with The Sixth Sense, I'm going to give a warning that from this point on my video will contain spoilers. I did my best not to spoil anything so far, and I think I did a good job, thank you very much. But from now on, I'm not holding back. The movie is infinitely better than my video could be, so I would suggest you watch it before going into this one. Thank you. Continuing in 3, 2, 1. David's story is about him finding a greater sense of purpose. He works as a security guard, already in the field of protection, but he feels there is something missing. He says he wakes up every day with a feeling of sadness, that he doesn't anymore at the end after taking the role of the overseer. That's what his superhero alias is named in Glass, so I'm going with that. This feeds into his family problems. David keeps his wife, Audrey, played by Robin Wright, and his son Joseph, played by Spencer Treat Clark, at a distance. This is another way where this unbelievable story of a superhero is tied into the reality, and is another meaning for the title Unbreakable. Not only is he physically unable to break, but he's also unable to be vulnerable to his wife and child. David and Audrey, before the crash, had seemingly already concluded that their marriage was pretty much done with. David surviving the crash is what Audrey felt gave them another chance, and she wants to try again. That's why this scene of the date I showed is important. This is their first real step in trying again. And this is when David reveals to Audrey when he first thought they wouldn't make it.
When was the first time the thought popped into your head we might not make it?
I had a nightmare one night. And I didn't wake you up so you could tell me that it was okay.
The first sign of trouble for this unbreakable man was his inability to be, well, breakable. And the conclusion of David and Audrey, after David has fought the man in orange and become the overseer, is David carrying Audrey to bed and telling her he had a nightmare. I can't talk about David's story, especially that part of it, without talking about his very first scene. Because a lot is done with his character on his very first appearance in the train. In the first seconds we hear this is a train going to Philadelphia. David is returning home from New York from a job interview. This isn't explicitly stated yet, although with David's tiredness, this definitely feels instantly to me like a return trip. The first thing David does that really catches our eye is when this woman is about to sit next to David. David looks at her and removes his wedding ring and puts it in his pocket. It's a bold choice to have our protagonist make, but I really think it's a brilliant one. It instantly shows us the nature of the story we're in. He's our hero, but it's not that black and white. It also shows us that our character is married, but there is obviously something wrong with that marriage, which is setting up a major story element for the rest of the film, in a simple visual way. Also note the return trip from job interview, why David was there to begin with. We also first set up David's fear of water, through him jokingly asking the woman after she sits down,
Are you looking for any male synchronized swimmers? I'm thinking about getting into that.
Is that right?
I'm afraid of water. Think that's a problem?
This fear of water is a major part of the movie, and water is, for all intents and purposes, David's kryptonite. The next thing they start talking about is football. She represents someone in Philadelphia. She asks him,
Do you like football?
to which he responds,
Not really.
Now this may not be something you'll catch on your first watch, but it is also setting up a big plot point in the film. David was a star athlete when he was younger, but faked an injury to be with his wife, who didn't approve of football. This is definitely far from a Save the Cat type scene. The way we're introduced to David doesn't make him look like the best of dudes, but it does grab your attention more than watching a character make a completely agreeable choice in their first scene. Hell, Elijah Price, David's mentor turned villain, gets a way more sympathetic introduction. Well, look at that. I've gotten so far into a superhero movie without talking about the main antagonist, and also so far into an M. Night Shyamalan movie without talking about the twist. And it's not an accident. You see, I write scripts for these things. I wanted to save it, because as in The Sixth Sense, my favorite character dynamic was with Cole and his mom, here it is between David and Elijah.
What's your name? Lex. Lex Luthor. Meeting you, Superboy, is about the most thrilling thing that's ever happened to me.
Something I didn't really talk about in my The Sixth Sense video is Bruce Willis's performance. He did a great job as Malcolm, and I should have at least mentioned it, but I'm going to compensate for it here by deservedly pointing it out. David Dunn is my favorite and perhaps the best Bruce Willis performance. It's in fact one of my favorite character portrayals of all time. Bruce Willis has just the right energy and mannerisms for this quiet and subdued character. This feels like a complete person to me, and I believe every line he delivers.
You're right. If you pull that trigger, that bullet is just going to bounce off me and I'm not going to be hurt. But then I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to pack and I'm going to leave for New York. Why? Because I thought we were just starting to be friends for real. And friends listen to each other. They don't shoot each other. Do they, Audrey?
No shooting friends, Joseph.
A lot of this is thanks to good writing. A lot of it is also thanks to Bruce Willis's fantastic performance. Now it's hard to say what is Samuel L. Jackson's best performance. The man has done about 1 billion movies, and in each one he has been great. Elijah Price, or Mr. Glass, is one of my favorite characters of his though, and a truly great performance, and a fantastic opposite to David Dunn.
That's it, Cracker Jack. You're gonna be sitting your ass in jail now.
How much for this one?
I kind of offhandedly mentioned earlier that Elijah Price is the villain of the movie. He doesn't seem like one for most of the runtime. He seems a little strange and obsessive, but not necessarily villainous. But all of this seems understandable due to his classic, tragic villain backstory. Elijah is first introduced in the opening scene of the movie, as a baby, after being born with broken arms and legs. It's a chilling scene and a grim opening for a superhero movie, but sets the tone very well and really makes us sympathize with Elijah instantly. After that, his second introduction is another flashback to when he is a child. This scene shows how his obsession with comic books started. As he mentions later on, he spent most of his life in hospitals reading comic books. The scene is his mother showing him she has a gift for him outside, across the street. Elijah is afraid to go outside, fearing not only breaking something again, but also the ridicule of other kids.
I'm not going out there anymore. I'm not getting hurt again. This was the last time I told you.
You can't do anything about that. You might fall between this chair and that television. If that's what God has planned for you, that's what's going to happen. You can't hide from it sitting in the room.
They call me Mr. Glass at school because I break like glass.
But Elijah manages to go outside and get his gift, a comic book, making us understand the later obsession with the medium he has. It's also a nice foreshadowing to the fight David will have with the Orange Man at the end. And almost 20 years later, it turns out to be a foreshadowing to Glass, but that's a completely other thing. Throughout the movie, we hear 3 incidents that have happened in and around the Philadelphia area.
I watched the aftermath of that plane crash. I watched the carnage of the hotel fire. I watched the news, waiting to hear a very specific combination of words, but they never came. Then one day I saw a news story about a train accident, and I heard them. There is a sole survivor, and he is miraculously unharmed.
At the end, when David shakes hands with Elijah, it's revealed to him and the audience that Elijah was behind these incidents, purposefully causing them to find his Superman. I love this ending. I know especially at the time it got compared a lot to The Sixth Sense, and not in a very favorable way, seeing us both have a twist ending. And as a twist, it isn't as groundbreaking as The Sixth Sense, but it still works. It's fairly surprising, but it feels inevitable. This is what this has to be. This is how the story has to end. The emotional weight of the scene cannot be understated. The friendship we've seen these characters grow throughout the movie, the ups and downs they take, there's always that feeling I get that this time I want it all to end up okay, but I know it cannot be, and the movie would be weaker if it did. Seeing the horrible realization in David's eyes as he looks around the room and notices all the evidence of Elijah's terrible crimes just gets me every time. Elijah telling David, well, just listen to this and tell me you don't get chills.
Now that we know who you are, I know who I am. I'm not a mistake.
David slowly walking away, Elijah, or at this point what he truly realizes he is, Mr. Glass yelling behind him, raising his voice as David gets further and further. The music swelling. I fucking can't help myself. This is perfect.
I should have known way back when. You know why, David? Because of the kids.
They called me Mr. Glass.
It's not The Sixth Sense, it's not supposed to be The Sixth Sense, but it's a twist that puts Elijah's role in the movie into a whole new light, but it functions in a different way. This is a difficult realization that leads to catharsis and a much needed release. It's in a way a happy ending. This is a horrible realization. This friend of mine, this mentor who helped me realize who I was working behind the scenes way more than I realized. He is responsible for all the death that led to David finding out who he really is. He did a lot of good for David, but the cost was terrible. The movie even ends on these freeze frames, telling us what happened after this, contributing to that real-life story feel of the movie I talked about earlier. I don't care what anyone says, this scene is utter perfection. The editing, the music, the cinematography, and the peak performances from Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis. There's nothing that I don't like about this. Every time I see it, it brings a tear to my eye. And since I mentioned the music, before we get to the end, I would quickly like to talk about the music.
You shake a pretty mean cake, Batman.
It's nothing.
The music is something I failed to mention when talking about The Sixth Sense. That soundtrack, same as this, was composed by James Newton Howard. Great music is very similar to the tight editing in Shyamalan movies. It's something I could mention for pretty much each one of his films. And though I neglected to mention it in my last video, I cannot talk about Unbreakable and not mention the soundtrack. Music makes such a huge part of a movie for me, even though I don't really know that much about it. Every single movie I consider among my favorites also has a soundtrack I would consider among my favorites, with pretty much the only exception being No Country for Old Men, and that's because that movie doesn't have a soundtrack. The music in Unbreakable also manages to evoke that superhero feeling, especially looking at a moment like this. In fact, the track, The Orange Man, might be my favorite track. Not only does it contain that moment, but it also contains this. And they're both just some of the best stuff I've ever heard. Music is hard to talk about since I don't know much about it, but I feel like I just needed to mention it, highlight it especially. This is one of the best soundtracks ever for me.
Have a singular quality to it. A singular quality meaning that, you know, the kind of thing that you could hear just one or two or three or four or five notes from and immediately say, ah, that's the music from Unbreakable. And that's not just in terms of melody, a thing you can whistle, but somehow that the music would have a quality to it, a tonality, a life of its own, a personality that would be just as distinctive as the film.
I will never forget these words. With great power comes great responsibility.
So, when I first saw Unbreakable, and many times after that, Unbreakable was just Unbreakable. A single movie that M. Night had a lot more story to, but it got cut out in favor of an origin story format. But right now, there's 2 sequels, and one of these is a spoiler, in a weird way, and in such a strange way that I don't know how to mention what movie it is without giving it away, so I'm sorry if you didn't know this. But just to avoid spoilers as best as I can, I'm gonna leave a timestamp here that you can jump to avoid any sequel talk. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. The first sequel was a secret. It was an unrelated thriller about a man with multiple personalities who kidnaps 3 teenagers. Turns out, rather than just being a thriller, it was a villain origin story for the Beast. At the end of the film, Visions from the Unbreakable soundtrack starts playing and David Dunn pops up. The movie was of course split, and with this poster, I don't know how I didn't see it coming. Sad thing is, just a little aside, I did get the twist spoiled like the same day I was going to see the movie, because YouTube recommended a video with this thumbnail and this title. Yeah, thanks, nice thumbnail, hope you got your clicks. But oh well, thankfully I don't care about spoilers that much. I liked Split when it came out, and I still do. It's a good thriller, It's tense, the cinematography is really nice, it felt like a real comeback for Shyamalan, and James McAvoy's performance is absolutely stunning. It had problematic aspects, and it's by no means perfect, but honestly a really great thriller in my opinion. And, like all good Shyamalan movies, it also has a moment that brings a tear to my eye, which I always appreciate. The last in the trilogy is Glass, a movie I already mentioned a couple of times. This is probably the most controversial one in the trilogy, and it would be that for me too. There are a lot of aspects about it that I love, but I also feel like it takes the biggest missteps. I really appreciate the chances it took. Shyamalan didn't give us a conventional ending, and I wouldn't want him to, but I just don't know if I personally like every choice he made. Overall, I still enjoy it. I think it's a really well-made film, and I have watched it a few times since. Every returning actor does a fantastic job once again, and it also has Sarah Paulson, and I can't help but love Sarah Paulson. But neither of these movies are really in my head when I watch Unbreakable though. Unbreakable still feels like such a singular thing to me. And I don't mean to say the sequels ruin it, they definitely don't. I'm just so immersed in this part of the story. And for a long time, this was all there was to this story. I'm glad it got its sequels. I do really like both of them. I'm happy Shyamalan got to make them the way he wanted. And I don't know if it's just the type of movie Unbreakable is, but I just like it as a singular story. So yeah, Unbreakable. What a movie. What an absolute masterpiece. And a film that, despite being a superhero film, manages to be cinema. Next time around I will be concluding this M. Night Shyamalan collection trilogy by going over my favorite film of all time, Signs. So like and subscribe for that, leave a hateful comment for that jab I took at the Snyderverse movies earlier, but remember, you're only allowed to send me death threats if you subscribe first. See you next time with Signs, and once again, bye bye. I gotta come up with a better way of ending these.
These are mediocre times, Mrs. Dunn. People are starting to lose hope. It's hard for many to believe there are extraordinary things inside themselves as well as others. I hope you can keep an open mind.